So, you know how in my video from last week, I said I was going to make some shorter off-the-cuff videos in the interim between video essays? Well, shockingly, apparently that was a month ago. I swear I had an idea for a short video, but it's kind of been spiraling out of control into its own full-ass video essay, if I'm being completely honest, and I, for one, am miffed about it, so you can't be mad at me because I'm already mad at me. But I had another idea for a shorter video. HBomberGuy recently put out a video that's kind of broken the internet, and I wanted to just give a little bit of my advice on the topic. If you guys haven't seen the new HBomberGuy video, you absolutely should. I know it's 4 hours long, but I think it's an extremely important work of journalism and an exploration of the causes and effects of plagiarism. And now half the video looks at several historic cases of YouTube plagiarism, and then it goes on into some recent cases regarding a few pretty well-known YouTubers, and the last half details the saga of James Somerton's egregious and prolific plagiarism, and the extent to which he profited off of the work of talented writers, many of whom have never seen even a fraction of as much money for their work as James made stealing and repackaging their writing. So, I'm making this video for a couple of reasons. If you've ever thought making a video essay sounded fun and you wanted to give it a go sometime, or you already make content and just want some extra tips about how to research and take notes in a more effective way that can also help make sure that you don't accidentally fail to give proper attribution, or even if you're just in school and want the same thing to help with your papers, or if you just want to look at what goes on inside the video essay process, then this video is for you. So obviously, this isn't going to be useful to anyone who's going to intentionally plagiarize, because they're doing it intentionally, but for everyone else, I wanted to give some advice on researching, note-taking, and script management that can help you give credit to the people whose ideas have helped you arrive at your own ideas. And obviously, I'm not the final authority on the topic. These are just things that I've learned in my experience making content and writing papers, and I hope it can be useful to you. I'm going to break things up into two categories. Category 1, you're doing research on a topic that requires multiple sources in order to make a case or explain a topic. In Category 2, you're citing one major source of inspiration, but you want to add your own thoughts, experiences, and perspectives on the topic that you felt were maybe not there in the original. For these two categories, I'll use my Split Brain video as an example of Category 1, and my Sherlock review as an example of Category 2. Now, a lot of the examples of plagiarism that HBomb covered in his most recent work had to do with people who were basically pretending, for lack of a better word, to have done a lot of research. They had multiple sources, but really they were just ripping off those sources word for pages and pages of text, just kind of slapping quotes from several different sources into a script haphazardly. So, what should you do to make sure that you cite everything properly, use what you're citing properly, and have a transformative analysis of all the works that you're citing? Number 1, take your time when you're in the research process. Be organized about it, make sure that you know where all of your notes were pulled from. For my video on split brain research, for example, I read over 20 papers and articles to get a complete picture of the history and to answer all the scientific questions I had about the topic. And I obviously took a lot of notes. But when I would write the notes, I would just kind of summarize or paraphrase the important bits as I read through each paper, but that ended up kind of making more work for me in the end, because in the script writing, I'd have to go back to my notes and then to the papers to make sure that the stuff in my notes wasn't quotes. Because even though I was citing every instance I referenced a paper, it would still be improper attribution if you accidentally write a quote into your script and don't say it was a quote even with a citation attached. So now I have a whole new system for taking notes. So whatever I'm reading, if there's a part that I think is really important and I want to use or come back to later, I'll put that part in brackets, which is way less time consuming than highlighting or underlining. Next to that bracket, I'll put a number. And then on my notebook, I'll write that bracket number down, followed by the page number. And then I'll write a summary of what's in brackets. And if I have something to add that's a critique or an original idea about the thing, I'll actually make a footnote at the bottom of the page, separating that note from the original idea that I had about it. Now, I know this sounds like a lot, and it does feel faster to just brute force things, but when you have a clear system of what things mean, how to find the original piece of text you're referencing, and so forth, it makes it much easier and faster when you're knee-deep in the writing process and relying mostly on your notes. Now, number 2 is be trigger happy when it comes to citations. Put them everywhere. But also try and write in your references into the actual dialogue. Now, I learned to do this with writing papers in college because a sentence like Pinto and colleagues in their 2017 paper demonstrated sounds a lot better, at least to me, than explaining the findings of a paper and then tacking on the end, parentheses, Pinto et al. 2017 parentheses. I just find that it flows better in writing, and in a video, it has the added benefit of ensuring that even if someone doesn't see your citation on screen, they know where you're getting the information from. Avoid quotes when you can, but if you use them, put the quote on screen in some way, whether by using a screenshot of the text and highlighting or typing the quote itself out as a graphic. Both have their stylistic pros and cons, and don't feel married to any particular one. For my video, I largely use the latter one, doing direct quotes. I like doing it that way personally because I think it provides an interesting visual, and it allows viewers who are more interested in the topic to be able to pause and read the surrounding text to absorb more of the context, which also kind of prevents you from cherry picking, because if you know people are going to pause something and read the whole page, you're not just going to cherry pick a quote that isn't actually saying what you want it to say. Number 3, pick a standardized citation style. Coming from a psych major, obviously I'm most familiar with APA, American Psychological Association, but you don't have to use that. You can use MLA, Chicago, really whatever you find the easiest and best to use. The particular citation style isn't so important as just having some form of standardization, so you already have a system that's been developed to ensure proper citation. And this goes both for your in-video citations as well as your references in the description. Now, in addition to going through however many iterations and drafts for my scripts that I need for the writing process itself, I actually make 3 versions of the final draft. There's the main one. This is the one I write like a paper. This is the main draft that all previous iterations follow the formula of. And for that reason, I kind of call it the living draft. I write this in a structured format for the argument and then add my APA parenthetical citations in the same way that I would do with a paper. And the second version is exclusively for the teleprompter. Now, in case you're wondering what I use for a teleprompter, by the way, I use a DesView T2 teleprompter, which has donut rings that screw into your lenses, and then it kind of slides onto that, and it also has a spot where you can secure your phone or tablet and use that as the screen for the teleprompter. It's about $70, so it's not cheap, but it's also not the most expensive teleprompter in the world by far, and I think it's built very well, and I'd say it's a very worthwhile investment for, you know, a one-person crew if you're just doing YouTube videos, and you feel it would be worthwhile for you to have a teleprompter. And to go with that piece of equipment, on my phone I have this app called PromptSmart, not sponsored, but could be sponsored if you're listening, PromptSmart, because I've been using them for years. And the reason why I like it so much is it has a speech recognition feature where instead of being a steady scroll of text, which I always had trouble with, it follows your voice as you're actually reading. So you get to be the pace setter, which is really nice if you need to take a break during a take for whatever reason. And I find it nice if I want to break script and go off the cuff like I'm doing right now, or I have an idea for a joke or something like that. It's nice that it doesn't keep running away from you as you start talking off script. But going back to the actual document, for the teleprompter script, I strip it down to just the words. All of the bullet points and spaces are gone, all of the citations are gone, it's just the words I'm saying and maybe a couple notes on like how I want to perform a take or something like that. And it's used for one thing, to put into the teleprompter. That way I don't have a bunch of stuff in parentheses that I'm not going to verbally say, clogging it up. But it's in a different draft altogether, so I don't remove important citations from the main draft, so I can always go back and reference that when I'm editing. And the final version of the script are the screenplay versions. This version is structured similarly to the living draft, but it's specifically designed to help me in the editing process. Everything that will translate to a visual, graphic, animation, B-roll, sound design, whatever, it goes in bold, and I type it wherever I think it's going to happen in the dialogue. So the first thing I do is obviously put all the citations in bold in this draft, so I can easily spot where I need to put the graphics for the citations. Putting citations in bold is especially helpful because when I'm editing a section of a video essay, once I get all the A-roll in the timeline and cut up nicely, I can just play that track and follow along in the script, and whenever I get to a citation, I just hit the M key on my keyboard and put a marker on the timeline. And then I go back and add the graphic for the citations after I've added all the markers, so I know where they go. Oh, also, I don't edit my video essays in one timeline. I have as many sequences as I have sections in the script, which will later translate to chapters in the video. And at the end of the editing process, I put each sequence into one timeline at the very end. Not to nerd out on you too much, I just find that extremely helpful. And if you make long videos, I think it's a very helpful trick because it not only helps in managing all of your assets and keeping a timeline from getting obscenely messy, but it also helps managing the citation checks. And finally, number 4, the most important part, whatever you do and however you do it, triple check your work. That is the most important thing. And if you have someone who's willing to help you review your script or video draft and compare it to your sources, then that's always a good idea too. It's a really nice bonus if you have someone who's willing to do that for you. Now, we come to category 2. When you're writing something that is directly and primarily inspired by a single source, the first question you really need to ask yourself is, do you have anything new to add, or did your source of inspiration say it best the first time? Taking my Sherlock video as an example, my personal history with the show is, I would venture to say, pretty unique. For those of you who are maybe new to my channel, you might notice that it's called The Art of Deduction, and a lot of my older work has Benny Cumbersmuch's Sherlock in the thumbnail. I was a big Sherlock Holmes geek as a kid. I loved just about anything Sherlock Holmes, the books, various adaptations, board games, everything. I started this channel as a way of building community and sharing my ideas about how to best train to develop the methods of deduction as Holmes was written to have displayed. But eventually I stopped making videos largely because I was, busy with college, but also because I didn't really know how to transition from making content about deduction to making content about my new interests. So when I finally rewatched BBC Sherlock, an old favorite of mine, I figured doing a review of it would be the best way to mark a new chapter for my channel, at which point I finally decided to go and watch HBom's video on Sherlock, because despite being a huge fan of his work, that was probably the only one of his videos I hadn't seen yet. So, in this case, for me, there was a popular work that served as a source of inspiration for something I wanted to write about anyway, because I had a unique personal history with the thing being discussed. So that's step 1. Step 2 is pretty obvious. Make sure you don't rehash the same arguments as your inspiration, and credit them when you do bring up one of their observations or points. One really simple way to help make sure that you don't rehash the same thing in the same way someone else has is intentionally diverge from the structure of the work that inspired you in your writing. This should come pretty naturally if you have a unique perspective on the topic, as previously mentioned. For example, it wouldn't really have made sense for me to talk about Moffat's history as a director and showrunner, to talk about Doctor Who and Jekyll, because the only one of Moffat's properties that I have any history with is Sherlock, and HBom explained Moffat's history as a showrunner so well, and I, having no knowledge outside of his research, had nothing to add, so I didn't mention it. Instead, I started off with one of my historic and personal complaints with the show, that being Sherlock as a sociopath, because in my history as a creator, making content about Sherlock Holmes and deduction, I got a lot of people in my community over the years that glorified Sherlock's antisocial behavior. And as someone with a degree in psychology, I knew that there was no such diagnosis as sociopath in the DSM-5, so it was an additional personal gripe. So that's where my critique of the show began. Later on, as someone who made his own mind palace and loved to dabble in various memory techniques, I critiqued the show's portrayal of the mind palace from a technique perspective as well as a cognitive psychology perspective. Now, when it came to doing the media critique, that's where I wanted to be the most careful. Instead of following HBom's format of taking one aspect of the show and kind of exploring it across the different episodes, I took the route of doing a mini review of each episode in chronological order, and in that way showing how the show's quality broke down over its run. So, when you have a central source of inspiration for something that you're creating, just start by structuring it in a different way. The substance and structure of an argument are very tightly linked, and so when you change the structure, the fundamental arguments will shift and change, because you'll be approaching things from a new angle, and thus be bringing a new perspective to the table. And even if you agree with the work you're inspired by on a lot of central points, which you likely do, your work will naturally provide a different perspective on the same thing when you intentionally diverge from the structure of the work that you're referencing. So, when you're writing about something that somebody else has already written about, think hard about what unique perspectives you bring to the table on the same topic, and cite the original work when you reference any arguments that aren't your own. Now, in my video, despite referencing HBom's video several times when we overlapped, there is one thing that I do feel like I fucked up on in retrospect. When I was talking about Sherlock's use of deduction, I called it magic mind powers a couple times, the exact same way HBom refers to the same thing in his video a couple times. Now, I meant this as an homage when I said it, but if I could go back, I would have added into the script something like magic mind powers as HBom put it so well in his video. In the moment, I meant it as an homage, but in retrospect, it doesn't feel like a proper way of paying homage, because if you hadn't watched his video and you just heard me saying that, you would think that that was my own pet name for this thing that the show did, and it wasn't. So HBom, if you're watching, I am very sorry about that. And I hope that this serves as an example of how important it is to be careful not just about the substance of your arguments and opinions, but also your voice and your sense of humor. At the end of the day, accidental plagiarism and plagiarism adjacent stuff happens. It's actually more common than you would think, especially if someone isn't familiar with how to properly cite a work. Now, a lot of my professors in college were aware of this, and a lot of them would explain that if you weren't sure if you were giving proper attribution to your sources, to schedule time to meet or show up during office hours with your manuscript and just show it to them so that they could check for you. As long as those issues don't come to light after you had submitted it, most of my professors, and I would wager most professors out there, will see that you've made an honest mistake and have made an honest attempt to prevent that mistake from sticking in the final product. So if you're in school, please, let me just take this moment to turn this into a PSA. Bear this in mind. Your professors don't want to fail you. If you're worried about accidentally plagiarizing something, take it to your professors, take it to the writing labs, if you have one on your campus. Just don't submit something you're not sure about. But accidental plagiarism aside, there's obviously no excuse for copying and pasting someone else's words into your script and reading them out as if you wrote them. Now, I would caution against the use of copy and paste as a function at all, and I know people are probably going to disagree with me on this one. And to be fair, I've used copy and paste before plenty in my outlines when I was in college. Just pulling a quote from a paper here, putting that into my outline, and then typing up some notes about it. And obviously, if you put that into quotation marks and make it very clear where it came from, it's not going to end up being a problem 9 times out of 10, but I don't know, it just provides an unnecessary crack for shit to fall through that doesn't need to be there. So nowadays, I always write or type out whatever it is that I'm taking a note on, even if it's a quote that I'm intending to use as a quote. It's just one of those things that I don't want to end up becoming a habit that could lead to a mistake later on, so I just take the extra time to do it all manually. This obviously takes more time for sure, but it has the dual benefit of forcing you to take more time to think about the source, which I personally find helpful. So I hope this helps convey to you, if nothing else, how involved the video essay format is. It's kind of the opposite of what you want if all you want to do is generate a content farm, something that HBomb talked about in his video, which is why most video essayists don't have a crazy fast upload schedules, especially if you're a one-person crew like me. I don't have a researcher, a producer, a co-writer, an editor, a graphic designer, any of that. I am all of those things for me. And luckily, I actually work in the production industry, so I have sufficient knowledge of all that stuff to be able to make something half decent by myself, although I don't have the best equipment in the world, even though I know how to use the fancy equipment. I don't have access to that personally, and you should just see how janky all this looks behind the camera right now. I'm also, I don't have a set anymore. If you watched the last video, I moved back home. This is off script, but I'm in my mom's studio right now, I'm working with what I got. I didn't have great equipment to begin with, and now I'm just kind of making do with a much smaller space, and all of my stuff is breaking on top of that. So it's a great time. Now, that all being said, when I need help with a specific shot, my girlfriend or one of my friends helps me, but that's the most help I get. I am a one-person crew, because this doesn't make enough money to pay anybody. And there are a lot of YouTubers out there who are like that. The point is, if you want to do video essays, don't treat them like a content farm, because they're not. And unless you have an entire team of people, you're probably not going to be able to make them very fast. They take time, research, and a little tender loving care. And you should only get into them as a format if you enjoy doing it. Because at the end of the day, succeeding at the whole YouTube game is always a crapshoot, and one that I have still not rolled sixes on after 10 years. So if you like doing heavily researched deep dives, and you like performing in video editing, yeah, try your hand at video essays. It's great. Even just make one. It's a really fun time if you like doing that sort of thing. But if not, and you get any form of success doing it, you're probably going to end up in a place where you're tempted to plagiarize to speed up this immensely slow process to just continue to feed the algorithm. And intentionally plagiarizing anyone's work, in case this doesn't go without saying, is an incredibly horrible and shitty thing to do to people. It is stealing. Plain and simple. It robs the original authors, who are the ones who deserve the credit, recognition, and most importantly, compensation for their ideas and works. And in addition, it'll forever be a stain on the reputation of you and anyone else who worked with you when you're caught, and you are gonna get caught eventually. If you want to make a content farm, just figure out something that doesn't involve stealing from other people who actually did the work. That's really all I can say. Either way, please go watch HBomb's video if you haven't watched it already. I can't recommend it highly enough. I've got a Patreon if you want to donate to it. You get some cool perks, like being in the credits, early access to stuff. If you're in the $5 tier, you get access to all my notes, all the graphics that I design, all that stuff. And yeah, that's really all I had for the day. Hopefully I won't be too long before the next video, but it probably will, because you know me, and I'm not really good at this whole YouTubing thing. Am I? No. Alright. Bye.